Thank you very much, Chloe. Well, thank you, those of you who've managed to come back from lunch. I promise not to overtax you, because I realise at this stage of the afternoon you're probably just wanting to chill out and sort of let those nice sandwiches and possibly even a glass of wine go down. You should be so lucky. I've just been on a train which got diverted because there's a tree on the line. I'm used to leaves on the line in London disrupting it, but you don't do things by halves. You've got a whole tree up here. Right, I'd like to start off by asking you to look around the room. You look to me to be roughly equally divided, 50-50, men and women. You're all working roughly as hard as each other, I guess, to get a good degree. And you'll all emerge from university with, by and large, I should say, the same similar-ish grades. Now, the chances are you've all got the same work experience as well, which I would guess is practically none, but on a serious level. So you're going to arrive in the world of work pretty much of a muchness. Yet as soon as you join the workforce in this country, and I have to say I don't know statistics for elsewhere, but I presume nowhere else is brilliant on this front, as soon as you join the workforce, there will be a complete divide between you. The women in this room are likely to earn 13 or 14% less than the men from the very outset. Figures from the ONS at the end of last year said that women graduates started at about 21,000 and blokes started on 24. Why is that? You've all got the same degree. In actual fact, women tend to get slightly better degrees than men. They arrive in the workplace anyhow with more firsts and 2-1s. But for some reason, women don't value themselves as highly as men value themselves. They're prepared to do the same job for less money. In fact, recent research for the 30% Club, which is a group of chairmen of big companies all committed to trying to get more women on boards, this research showed that women are, by a factor of 3, less likely to recognise their own worth than other people around them. And a young bloke joining a FTSE 100 company, like I think you've had Unilever talking to, somewhere like that, joining one of those 100 largest companies today, has an unbelievable 4.5 times better chance of getting to the executive committee in a big company than a woman joining at the same time. Now, at the moment, I realise you probably aren't at all interested in any of this, because as students, your work speaks largely for itself and for you. Your essay marks, your exam performance will, by and large, determine your outcome. In the workplace, though, performance is, in many cases, not so easily nor so objectively judged. Those in the positions of power are not always fair. They're often prepared to let considerations such as their own ego override the performance of their staff. They may be keen to have someone to go for a drink with after work. You might not fit that bill. They may be happy to sideline someone who, although absolutely brilliant, is difficult to manage. Just look at the way the maverick cricketer Kevin Peterson has been booted out of the England team because he's a little bit nonconformist. Or they may quite simply feel a lot more comfortable with people just like themselves all over the place. And because most managers are men, these behaviours prejudice the advancement of women in the workplace. Now, obviously, other groups are similarly hindered, in terms of race, ethnicity, age. But at the moment, we're talking about women because that tends to be the workplace issue that is in the vanguard at the moment of this debate. Interestingly, some jobs in the city, such as investment management, that's where someone looks after pension fund money, and where the returns and the performance of those funds are easy to manage, rather like your essay results, women do particularly well. Their results speak for them, so they don't have to speak for themselves. And now, because companies are out to make money, that's what it's all about, they will, of course, tend to employ people as cheaply as they can possibly get them. This doesn't mean the cheapest people. It just means the best people they can get at the cheapest possible rate. And if women don't ask, they don't get. Now, the pay disparity between you will widen as you get older. By the time you're 30, the women will be earning significantly less, and the chances are you'll have missed out on a couple of promotions. A few years on, and you might want to take time out to have children. Possibly. Believe me, it's a bad decision. Don't do it. I have 2 of your age. Just forget it. But if and when, as women, you return to the workplace, there's a good chance you'll find it's all passed you by. Men in your peer group will have been promoted. They'll have more money. And if on return you seek flexible or part-time working, the managers are likely to find excuses to refuse. This can happen in even most apparently enlightened organisations. When I worked at The Guardian on the city desk, I was deputy city editor to start with, when I had my first daughter. And I decided, unbelievably now actually, that I was so in love with the little darling, I couldn't go back to work full time. So I said to my boss, listen, I 3 days a week, that's all I can do. And he said, oh, sod off, Lucy, you're not coming back, bye-bye. So I said, well, I shall have to resign then. And he said, well, you can't resign, but you can't come back part-time. And this was to a newspaper that was filling its editorial columns all the time with applauding companies on measures to help women back into the workplace and all this other type of hypocrisy. Meanwhile, on a daily newspaper, and there's simply no excuse not to be able to do flexible working on a daily newspaper. You come in, you do your job, you go home. Easy peasy, but they weren't to have it. So don't be fooled by the name over the doors. So eventually sidelined and dissatisfied with the less than stimulating role that tends to occur to them, a whole raft of bright, talented women will leave the workforce, sometimes to set up businesses, which is good, but often to disappear economically altogether. Now, this scenario is not only grotesquely unfair, I'm sure you will all agree with me on that, it is also economically imbecilic for the country as a whole. It also has a huge knock-on social consequence, i.e. we have loads and loads of very impoverished old women because they haven't earned enough to save for a decent pension and they live longer than men. But that's another side issue. Now, there's any number of guesstimates, of course, as to what might be the consequences of fairer treatment for women in the workplace. Most of them involve an awful lot of trillions of pounds and suspiciously large and round percentages. For example, the investment bank Goldman Sachs, where I'm sure some of you are going to bide your future lives, commissioned some research last year which suggested that if all the impediments to employment and restrictions affecting Western women were magically to disappear overnight, then America's GDP would leap by 9%, not 10, 9%, while the Eurozone's would soar by 13%. There are other studies now suggesting that if we had women at the top of the banking industry, we wouldn't have had the financial crisis of 07, 08. I think that's probably right, but nonetheless, let's be a bit sceptical about that one. There are now studies being produced which purport to show that 2 women in the boardroom make a measurable difference to the share price. And believe me, I'm sure if it were that easy, we wouldn't be struggling. Anyhow, at the moment, I think it's wise to leave all of this second-guessing to alone, just because it really isn't necessary anyhow. I don't know if any of you studying business, but about 15 years ago, probably longer, about that, we were sort of in the same type of debate surrounding corporate governance. That's the level of boardroom standards. We'd had dreadful fiascos like Polly Peck and Robert Maxwell, who'd run off with all the pension funds. And everyone decided we've got to rein in the boardrooms. This was a really good thing. We all agreed on that. It was terribly good. The problem was it was going to mean loads of red tape. It was going to cost a fortune to appoint all these non-executive directors. Then you've got to tell all the shareholders about it. It was all just too difficult for our big companies. Definitely, they didn't want anything to do with it. So academics set about trying to prove that corporate governance was good for your financial health. It didn't work. And what we did end up with was that bad corporate governance was definitely dreadful for your corporate health because it allowed boardroom tyranny, which potentially destroyed shareholder value and meant the companies collapsed. So the benefits of that were actually proved in the negative. And in the end, of course, as companies do, the costs of changing their behaviour and complying with new corporate governance reporting were rapidly assimilated. They all stopped crying. They got on with it, and until the recent financial crisis, at least, the benefits were felt in the reduction of top-level corporate failure. So similarly, I think we should focus today on what forward-thinking companies are actually saying that the loss of senior women is costing them. And believe me, the numbers are scary enough to grab headlines. One of our large accountancy firms, I won't tell you who it is, but there aren't that many of them to choose anything, told me last year that it reckons it costs them about £3 million every year, the loss of mid to senior level women. Now, if you think of that, I mean, obviously you can't. It would be ludicrous and stupid to multiply it across the entire economy, but it does give you a sense of the scale of what companies think female attrition is costing them. So not only are businesses failing to capitalize on all of the available talent, they're not even managing to save money while doing it. And with the West needing to exploit all of the intellectual capital we can in order to compete with the increasingly confident economies of Asia and the developing world, it just seems plain dumb to allow this needless waste just because it's easier to go on the way we always have. Now, if, like me, you believe it is time that a real cultural shift took effect in the workplace, what can you do? Well, most immediately, and you'd expect me to say this, wouldn't you? You could join an organisation like the Institute of Directors and try and lobby for change politically and in the broader economy. By the way, if you're a UK student, there's a good chance your university, Warwick or elsewhere, will have a bulk deal with the Institute of Directors, and they'll buy membership and then give it to you because it makes the uni look good. So it's a bit of a no-brainer. And also, the membership lasts for about 5 years after you hit the workplace. So it's quite useful when you actually start to see some of this iniquity for yourself. Now, at the risk of making you even more swollen-headed than you probably already are, you are the cream of university output in this room. And employers, whatever you think, will be jumping over themselves to hire you. You can afford to be picky, and you can afford to be demanding. So when you check out future employers, have a look online at the top echelons of their management. And if they are all or largely middle-aged blokes in suits, why not ask why when you turn up for the interview? And don't believe that joining a modern high-tech company is any guarantee of best practice, because Silicon Valley is absolutely crap at appointing women. They're even worse than the general economy as a whole. And think about it, whether you're a man or a woman here, do you really want to end up working somewhere where all of the top people are blokes with, in all probability, exactly the same mindset amongst themselves? I mean, there is actually growing research suggesting that diversity of opinion and robust discussion lead to better decision-making in business. So it's quite likely, actually, that if that setup is traditional and the mindset is very, very similar, if you could shake it up, that company would perform better, and therefore your long-term prospects would be better. And don't forget, it's not just big companies we're talking about. Entrepreneurs and smaller companies employ more than 90% of people in the country, working people, that is. And they are much more, if possible, concerned about their bottom line and what flexible working is going to mean and how dreadful it is that women go off and have babies all the time. And as you'll hear from Luke Johnson tomorrow, who's a great speaker, by the way, this country needs to do all we can to encourage wealth-creating entrepreneurs, who are the lifeline of our continued economic success. But smaller operations have to be encouraged not to waste the talent available to them as well. Now, I don't want to paint an entirely bleak picture of the inequalities in the working world and the economic damage that might be inflicted by that. There are companies, and Unilever is one of them, and organisations of all sizes making a real effort to meet the targets suggested a few years ago by Mervyn Davies, Lord Davies, that 25% of boardroom positions should be filled by women by 2015. And it was to celebrate those companies doing the most to create a pipeline of executive women that I set up the Breaking the Mould Awards last year. We got about 200 entries, which isn't bad for a launch event, and I'm hoping for more this year. And in order to help smaller companies improve their diversity and be a little bit more optimistic about it, we're going to create an online Academy of Excellence, which will showcase the entries of the companies to the awards. And then smaller companies who don't know what they're doing or don't know how to go about it can then look at what the best practice does and cherry pick a little bit from that. But you might be interested to hear about companies which were amongst last year's winners, because some you might find completely counterintuitive. I certainly did. Mobile phones giant Vodafone was our overall winner. And the defence company BAE Systems won the FTSE 100 company. I didn't even think they'd got a woman, let alone a strategy for, but they had a brilliant strategy for creating women executives. The betting group William Hill won the 250, while the state sector prize was carried off somewhat surprisingly by the Bank of England. Now, not all of these, in fact, none of them, is run by a woman, and they don't have crowds of women in the boardroom as yet. But they do have what look like really, really good workplace programs designed to nurture programs in the future. That's why it's worth asking when you go for interview, because they might look pale-male and stale in the online, but they might have some fantastic stuff going on behind the scenes. And just finally, because you lot, when you join the workplace, are likely to have to work until you're at least 75 and possibly 80 because of longevity, and no one can afford to pay you a pension. So you've got a working life ahead of you of, what, 55, 60 years. It's a long, long time. Now, you probably won't spend it in one career. You probably won't spend it with one company. In actual fact, you'll want to move around, retrain, take sabbaticals, travel, career hop, which is absolutely to be applauded. Companies will have to be adept at managing that much more mobile workforce, won't they? And they'll have to start offering to men, as well as women, flexibility, because otherwise the blokes would disappear just like the women have disappeared. So lucky you. And if you do come across any companies that you think have got fantastic career progression for women, let me know, and then I can put them in for the awards. So any questions, or let's discuss any of these issues, very happy to talk.
Okay, if you have any questions, put your hands up and we'll be running up the sides.
There's one in the middle.
Hi, thanks very much for the talk. One of the excuses, inverted commas, that companies give for the disparity between male and female employment progression is the nature of maternity leave. Do you think that recent political talks around equalising maternity and paternity leave would have a noticeable impact on employment and progression of recruitment, or do you think that they'd potentially find other ways of enforcing preset patriarchal standards?
Oh gosh, you're cynical, aren't you? How could you possibly think that was happening? I think it could help, but I don't think it's really the whole answer. And there are, I mean, as you sort of are suggesting, I think there are other reasons behind it. I mean, a lot of people see management and seniority just with a male face, which is why, you know, they actually don't want to appoint someone different from themselves. I mean, I think it would be beneficial. And I do have, believe me, I mean, I have some sympathy, particularly with smaller companies, that, you know, the notion of a woman going off possibly for a year's maternity break is very, very difficult to manage. You know, you've got to get someone in, then they become good, then you've got to let go. I mean, it's quite difficult. I feel a degree of sympathy. It's overcomeable, of course. So the answer, in brief, is yes, I think it could improve things, but I don't think it's the entire answer. That's it? There's a young lady there.
Hello, thank you for your talk. I don't know if you read Lean In from Sheryl Sandberg, the CEO of Facebook, but in her book she says that women should be the one who are engaging more, and so they should be leaning in, not men leaning out. But then when we discussed it, she's from the United States, and someone gave me the example of the woman who's working at McDonald's and has a child. She doesn't have any maternity leave. What choice does she have? And that happens in Europe too. Some women just don't have a choice. So did you work on that, and what did you find?
Well, the answer is no, not really. I thought the book was brilliant, and it's certainly, you know, if nothing else, it has really got quite a debate going, hasn't it, about much more. I think it's raised the profile of this entire issue. And America, I mean, although there are lots of, like Sheryl Sandberg, I mean, there are a number of top, very sassy women executives in the States, but actually America's pretty crap in terms of having senior women and non-executive women at the top. But anyhow, and yes, I mean, I agree with you, Dan, that there are two issues, aren't there? There's why haven't we got any more at the top, and what are we doing to help the poorer women who haven't got any choice at the bottom? And I think the whole, well, partly because I don't know anything about it, I don't know and haven't got the experience to talk about the, if you like, the political issues of childcare, which would obviously liberate and make things much easier for women down the bottom, particularly single women.
Hi, sorry, I got a mic over here.
Oh, okay.
Thanks. This is probably more on an informal level, but it's an argument I always have with my brother. When you say that you have like positive discrimination towards women, what do you say to people who make the argument that that's then inefficient because we're being like put forward in perhaps a position where a male counterpart wouldn't be, to like encourage greater employment for us in the...
Yes, it's quite an interesting one, isn't it? Well, firstly, I mean, our government at the moment is absolutely dead set against quotas. I must admit that, and before I say this, I have to say so is the Institute of Directors. However, and I've been writing about this whole issue for sort of 20-odd years, and I have now come round to the idea that quotas are necessary if we are going to affect long-term change. Now, what's quite interesting is you know, if you say that you're going to get a load of mediocre women if you start to have, like in politics, they have done shortlists. I mean, I think that presupposes that you haven't got a load of very, very capable women around from which to select. You know, I mean, we haven't only got half a dozen women, and therefore by having a quota, we're going to run out of them. I mean, there are loads and loads of talented women at the right level and able to go into the boardrooms of Britain. So, I mean, I don't actually think that by imposing quotas, we're going to diminish the quality at all, even if you accept your brother's argument. I mean, I think it would enhance the quality. And I think there's a lot of evidence in, say, the Nordic countries where they've had boardroom quotas for quite a long time. And the Institute of Directors is a member of the European Women on Boards. And they would argue very forcefully that the quality of board decisions has actually improved with having the quotas, and that by having the quotas, it does encourage the building of the pipeline, and therefore the quotas become superfluous after a couple of years.
Yeah, hi, thanks for the talk. And yeah, like my first question would be just like regarding the research on this, well, let's say this gender, income gap. So like firstly, like, is this 13% like difference in starting salary, is it like mean or median? Like is it the difference between mean or median salaries, in the sense that like, because like I could imagine that in some male professions, like you can have extremely high starting salaries, but on average, like potentially the mid salary for men is still kind of similar-ish. So
yes,
like,
no, I mean, I agree with you, and the answer is that I don't know. They're ONS figures, and sort of late last year, but my feeling is that it is, and yes, you can get some grotesquely high salaries for men, but you can also get some very high salaries for women. And so that this is a real comparison of people going into, you know, becoming an investment banker with Goldman Sachs. The man will get that, the woman will get that. Not that it is sort of, you know, well, okay, all women do nursing and teaching, which pays, you know, nothing, while every bloke goes and be a rocket scientist in the city. Well, of course they're going to earn more. I think that is filtered out. I mean, I think this is a genuine comparison of people doing the same work.
yeah, yeah, like, and my second question would have been just like regarding like to what extent is it caused then by kind of sectoral differences, and like what could be, well, done on like to like, let's say, encourage more women to, let's say, those sectors that are extremely profitable instead of, let's say, public sector, and then on the other hand, making public sector more as a like acceptable job in a sense for men?
I mean, it's a very interesting point you raise. And yes, I sort of agree with you. And what is also quite interesting, sorry, I'm hearing some talk, is that jobs that women do go into then tend to lose social status. Like, i.e. teaching is much lower on people's social radar now than it used to be, because it's a profession filled with women. And the same is happening in societal perceptions with medicine, as more women become involved there. So, I mean, whether you end up sort of perpetually chasing your tail. I mean, I take your point that sort of the state sector is possibly less appealing to chaps, but and obviously sort of, you know, I don't know, does Vodafone pay a load better than some other particular company? I wouldn't have thought so particularly.
We've got time for 2 more quick questions.
Hi, thank you for your talk. I was just wondering what most of the men or people point out that the reasons for which women are not appointed. So, like, a few people say that women are more emotional, which is why they're not appointed. And there are several other reasons that people do mention for not appointing women on higher positions. So what do you think, how much is it justified, or the reasons that they present, how much are they justified, and what are your views about it?
Yes, I mean, I think you're right. Men and women do manage and behave in the workforce differently. I mean, men do tend to be, by and large, more autocratic. Women tend to be more collaborative. I mean, if you can take those very, very broad generalizations. However, I think that always used to be the justification. And I think now, particularly with more creative industries and the need to get the intellectual capital out of a business and a workforce, a more nurturing, collaborative style of management is actually one that a lot of companies are seeking. So those arguments about not promoting a woman because she doesn't come in and beat you up first thing in the morning is sort of, that's going to one side now. So I think it's more important that women actually make sure that they have the hard skills as well as the soft skills that will allow them to get recognised, to be promoted, that they have got finance as well as HR under their belt by the time they sort of head towards the executive committee. And then I think there's absolutely no reason for not selecting a woman and having a man instead. There's a chap down here who's had his hand up the entire time, and I've just overlooked him, sorry.
Hi. I run leadership institutes all over the world, and usually women actually outperform the men in the competitions. And the latest social science study came out saying women are better in 14 out of 16 of leadership categories. My question to you is, do you think you need to have a cultural paradigm shift of leadership? I study rhetoric, and when a man reads a speech and a woman reads a speech, even women think that the man's going to be a better leader. Because the leadership ideal is more masculine, more decisive. And do you think this has to be done at a cultural level?
Yes, I do, and that's what I was saying earlier, that I think both men and women still think of leadership management with a male face, even though we have got some extraordinarily good women, and, you know, good in a very, if you like, typically masculine type of way. I mean, if you look at someone like Kate Swan, who's just left W.H. Smith, I mean, she completely transformed. I mean, it was a complete and utter dog's dinner, W.H. Smith. I mean, if it hadn't existed, you just simply would not have invented it. It apparently had nowhere to go. And Kate went in and, you know, like she was absolutely ruthless in terms of cutting out the cost and cutting, you know, you could not fault her. And she is, but still, you know, people had quite a bit of difficulty with her because she's, you know, because she is a woman. And I don't, in all honesty, until we get an awful lot more women and it becomes more normalised, I mean, I think we're in a chicken and egg, don't you, really? I mean, if you have wonderful women like Sheryl Sandberg and actually visibly creating success, because another one of the issues has been that no one would look at a female CEO unless the corporation was in trouble. It was the last thing you did. So you actually had not a glass ceiling, you had the glass precipice, which was where you were put in, almost doomed to fail. I mean, actually, something like that happened to Marjorie Scardino at Pearson, only she managed to sort of pull it round. And it was a similar type of thing with Kate at W.H. Smith. But once you stop getting that, and then with the women then failing, and it becomes more normalised, and they do successful things like, you know, Angela Ahrens at Burberry or Facebook or whatever, then, you know, I think everyone will say, oh gosh, they're not so stupid, these women, are they? They can do stuff. Well, you know, that's why I veer towards quotas, because I think people need a good kick up the backside. Otherwise, it won't happen. Anyhow, I think that's my chance, isn't it? Thank you very much indeed for listening.